tell me exactly what happened, Jessica?
My ex-boyfriend has restraining order, and he's not supposed to be here around me with this house. And I just found his jacket here, his jeans, and his keys here.
Okay.
In my closet, hiding.
Okay.
And I believe he's in the house hiding somewhere. Because he wouldn't leave his Hummer keys laying in my house.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Okay. Is there anybody that saw him in the house at all?
That what? Sorry.
Did anybody see him inside the house?
No, but his stuff is here.
Okay. Got it. Did you, look around? Did you see him at all or anything?
No.
Okay. Okay. Bear with me 1 second, okay?
So we believe he's hiding somewhere.
Okay. Cameras around your house?
Yes, we do.
All right.
Picture this. It is nearly 2 in the morning on October 30th, 2022, the night before Halloween, in a quiet residential neighborhood on Geneva Street in Aurora, Colorado. A family is returning home from a party, laughing, tired, carrying the ordinary warmth of a night spent together. They have no idea that someone is already inside their house. They have no idea that hidden in the darkness of those familiar rooms, a man is waiting, a man with a gun. A man who has already decided that none of them are leaving. What happens in the next few minutes will leave 4 people dead, a mother and her 2 children trembling in survival, and an entire community asking the same question. How does something this horrific happen, and why did no one see it coming in time? The woman who lived in that house had tried to move on. She had done everything the system tells victims to do. She had gone to the authorities. She had filed for a restraining order against her ex-boyfriend, Joseph Castorna, just 6 days before that night. Her father had filed one too. Both of them understood, in the way that people who have lived close to danger always understand, that Joseph Castorna was not going to accept being left behind. He had made that clear. He had threatened her. He had circled her life like something predatory and unfinished, and she had tried, with every legal tool available to her, to draw a line between his world and hers. But a restraining order is a piece of paper, and on the night of October 30th, that piece of paper meant nothing to Joseph Castorna. Earlier that evening, the family had gone out. The house on Geneva Street sat quiet and empty, or so everyone believed. Castorna had other plans. According to investigators, he broke into the home while no one was there and positioned himself inside, armed and waiting. He did not come to talk. He did not come to plead or negotiate or beg for one last conversation. He came with a gun, and he came with purpose, and he settled into the darkness of that house and waited for the people inside it to come home. When the woman arrived back at the house that night with her 2 children, something immediately felt wrong. She walked into the bedroom, and there they were, Castorna's keys, sitting there, in her bedroom. Her stomach must have dropped in that moment because she already knew what those keys meant. She did not hesitate. She picked up her phone and dialed 911, speaking in a low, urgent voice, telling the dispatcher that her ex-boyfriend might be hiding somewhere inside, that he should not be there, that there was a restraining order, that she was frightened. She was still on that call when the shots rang out. The sound of gunfire erupted through the house, multiple rounds, rapid and merciless, and by the time Aurora police officers arrived on scene, the nightmare had already played out to its most brutal conclusion. They found 4 people shot, 4 people dead. The victims were Maria Anita Serrano, 22 years old, Jesus Serrano, 51 years old, Kenneth Eugene Green Luke, 21 years old, and Rudolfo Salgado Perez, 59 years old. 3 of them were relatives of Castorna's ex-girlfriend. The 4th, Rudolfo, rented a recreational vehicle parked on the property. He had heard the chaos and stepped outside. That decision cost him his life. The woman and her 2 children were found alive, physically unharmed. In the wreckage of that home, in the blood and the silence that followed the gunfire, They were the only ones still breathing. Maria Anita Serrano was her sister. Jesus Serrano was her father. The man who was supposed to love her had just executed her family in front of the very walls she called home. What investigators began to piece together in the hours and days that followed painted the portrait of a man consumed by something that can only be called obsession. Castorna and the woman had been in a relationship. When it ended, he could not let go. He began to make her feel unsafe, threatening, lurking, refusing to accept the boundary she had tried to establish. The restraining orders filed just days before the murders were not the first signs of trouble. They were the last resort of a woman who had already tried everything else. She knew what he was capable of, and still, the system had not been fast enough. By the time those 4 people were lowered into the ground, Joseph Castorna was nowhere to be found. He had vanished. And what the investigation would soon reveal was that his disappearance was not panicked or spontaneous, it was calculated. While Aurora detectives processed a crime scene soaked in the blood of an entire family, the man responsible was already running. But here is the thing about a man who kills 4 people in cold blood and then runs: he carries that weight with him. He carries those names. He carries those faces. And no matter how far he runs, the world he left behind does not stop looking for him. The hunt for Joseph Castorna was about to begin. He was gone before the sun came up. While detectives in Aurora were still photographing the crime scene on Geneva Street, still notifying families, still trying to make sense of the scale of what had happened inside that house, Joseph Castorna had already crossed a border. Not a metaphorical one, a circumflex euros, a literal one. He had fled the United States entirely, slipping south into Mexico, leaving behind 4 bodies, a traumatized survivor, and a city that would not sleep easily for weeks. The Aurora Police Department's fugitive unit took the case. They understood almost immediately that this was not a man who had panicked and gone to ground locally. The speed and direction of his disappearance suggested planning. Castorna had known, or at least suspected, that the night he walked into that house with a gun would be the last night he could freely walk the streets of Colorado. And so he had an exit. He had somewhere to go. What investigators also uncovered was that he had not acted entirely alone, a circumflex euros, not in the escape, at least. Back in the Denver area, 2 men were taken into custody, Castorna's brother and a cousin. According to prosecutors, both had allegedly helped facilitate his flight from the United States in the immediate aftermath of the killings. They were each charged with accessory to first-degree murder after the fact, a circumflex euros, a charge that told its own grim story about the culture of silence and complicity that had allowed a man who just massacred 4 people to put miles, and then an international boundary between himself and justice. The investigation expanded rapidly. The Aurora Fugitive Unit began coordinating with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, other federal agencies, and, critically, authorities on the Mexican side of the border. This was not going to be a simple case of tracking someone down in a neighboring state. This required international cooperation, diplomatic channels, and the kind of patient, methodical intelligence work that fugitive cases demand. Castorna had banked on the belief that distance would protect him. He was wrong. For weeks he moved through Mexico. The trail was not always clear, but it was never entirely cold. Investigators were building a picture, a circumflex euros, following communications, tracking movements, working their contacts, and pressing every available resource into the search. Families of the victims were waiting. The survivor on Geneva Street was waiting. Aurora was waiting. And then, on December 10th, 2022, a circumflex euros, 41 days after the murders, a circumflex euros, Joseph Castorna was found. He was located in the north-central Mexican state of Aguascalientes, more than 1,500 miles from Aurora, Colorado. The arrest was the result of a coordinated effort involving the FBI, local American law enforcement, Mexican immigration authorities, and the Mexican federal government. He was taken into custody without incident. The extradition process began. Castorna was brought back across the border and returned to Colorado to face the full weight of what he had done. Prosecutors in the 18th Judicial District were ready. Senior Chief Deputy District Attorney Darcy Koffal and Deputy District Attorney Lauren Rabel had been building a case from the moment the crime scene was secured. They had the physical evidence. They had the 911 call a circumflex euros, the sound of a woman's terrified voice, and then the gunshots erupting in the background while she was still connected to the dispatcher. They had the restraining orders, filed and dated just 6 days before the murders, signed by 2 of the people Castorna would go on to kill. They had the testimony of investigators who had traced every step of his planning, his break-in, his wait in the darkness, and his flight from the scene. What the prosecution also had was a story that told itself with devastating clarity. This was not a crime of passion in the traditional sense a circumflex euros, not an explosion of rage in a single uncontrolled moment. This was premeditated. Castorna had broken into the home before the family returned. He had armed himself. He had waited in the dark for an extended period of time, composed enough to stay hidden until the people he had come to kill walked through the door. The law in Colorado has a specific and serious name for that kind of deliberate, calculated taking of a human life. It is called first-degree murder, and there were 4 counts of it. In the months between his extradition and the start of his trial, the full dimensions of Castorna's actions continued to emerge. It was revealed that in the weeks prior to the murders, he had also been involved in a separate criminal incident that involved 2 of the eventual victims. And in addition to the homicide charges, prosecutors filed charges related to his threats against his ex-girlfriend in the days before the killings. A picture was forming a circumflex euros, not of a man who simply snapped, but of a man who had been escalating for some time, crossing lines repeatedly, ignoring every legal boundary placed in front of him, operating as though consequence was something that applied to other people. The families of the 4 dead waited nearly 2 years for the trial to begin. They had buried their loved ones. They had tried to rebuild something from the rubble of October 30th, 2022. And they watched as the man who had taken everything from them sat in a courtroom and prepared to answer for it. What happened inside that courtroom would be, in the words of one prosecutor, the moment justice refused to look away. The courtroom in Arapahoe County was quiet with the particular kind of tension that only a murder trial carries a circumflex euros. The weight of the dead pressing into every square inch of the room, the families of the victims seated in rows with the kind of stillness that comes not from calm, but from years of waiting. It was May 2024. Nearly 2 years had passed since the night before Halloween on Geneva Street. 2 years of investigation, extradition, legal proceedings, grief too deep for any single word to contain. And now, finally, 12 jurors would be asked to look at the evidence and render their judgment. The trial lasted 9 days. Prosecutors laid out the case methodically and without mercy a circumflex euros, the break-in, the wait in the darkness, the 911 call, the gunshots audible through the phone while the dispatcher was still on the line, the 4 bodies, the flight to Mexico, the capture in Aguascalientes. They presented the restraining orders. They walked the jury through the physical evidence gathered from the crime scene on Geneva Street. They called witnesses who painted the full picture of what Joseph Castorna had done, and critically, how he had done it a circumflex euros, with planning, with deliberation, and with a complete and total disregard for the lives of 4 human beings who had never done anything to him except exist in the orbit of a woman he refused to release. The defense had the impossible task of countering a case this documented, this witnessed, this undeniable. The 911 recording alone a circumflex euros, that woman's voice, the sound of the shots a circumflex euros, was the kind of evidence that does not leave room for reasonable doubt. It is the sound of a murder happening in real time while a terrified mother tries to protect her children. On May 16, 2024, the jury returned its verdict. Guilty. 4 counts of first-degree murder. 1 count of attempted first-degree murder. For each murder count, the jury also returned findings on sentence enhancers a circumflex euros, additional legal determinations that would give the judge the full picture at sentencing. Castorna was acquitted on 1 separate attempted murder count, but the core of what the prosecution had argued a circumflex euros, that this man had deliberately and premeditatedly ended 4 lives a circumflex euros, had been affirmed unanimously by 12 of his peers. The families of Maria Anita Serrano, Jesus Serrano, Kenneth Luke, and Rudolfo Perez had waited for that word. Guilty. It would not bring anyone back. It would not fill the seats that were now permanently empty at family dinners and birthday tables and holiday gatherings. But it was the truth, spoken aloud in a court of law, on the record, forever a circumflex euros, that what happened on Geneva Street was not an accident, not a tragedy in the abstract sense, but a deliberate act of murder committed by one man against 4 innocent people. Sentencing came on September 3, 2024. Arapahoe County District Judge David Carpel presided. Under Colorado law, each conviction for first-degree murder carries a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. There is no discretion on that point. The law is absolute. And so the only question before the judge was whether those 4 life sentences would run concurrently a circumflex euros, meaning at the same time a circumflex euros, or consecutively, meaning one after another, stacked, an arithmetic of punishment that stretched far beyond any single human lifetime. Judge Carpel sentenced Joseph Castorna to 4 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional 24 years for the attempted first-degree murder of his ex-girlfriend. There was no ambiguity in that sentence. There was no future outside a prison cell waiting for him at the end of any road. Castorna, who had stood in the dark of a family's home with a loaded gun and chosen death for 4 people, would now spend every remaining day of his own life behind bars. Senior Chief Deputy District Attorney Darcy Coffall addressed the courtroom with words that cut directly to the center of what the case had always been about. She described Castorna as a coward who had executed an entire family and an innocent tenant because he could not accept the fact that a woman had chosen to move forward with her life without him. She said that what he had done was not about love, not about heartbreak, not about any of the softer human emotions that sometimes surround crimes of this type. It was about control. It was about a man who had decided that if he could not have her, then the people she loved most did not deserve to live. Deputy District Attorney Lauren Rabel spoke of the speed with which one man's actions had shattered so many lives a circumflex euros. Not just the 4 taken, but the survivor who had to rebuild herself from the wreckage of that night, the children who were present in that house, the extended family still carrying their grief forward. She said that the verdict ensured Castorna would never be able to victimize anyone else. He is now in custody awaiting assignment to a Colorado State Correctional Facility, where he will live out 4 consecutive life sentences a circumflex euros, 1 for Maria, 1 for Jesus, 1 for Kenneth, 1 for Rudolfo. 4 people who came home from a party on the night before Halloween and never came home again. And somewhere in Colorado tonight, a woman who did everything right a circumflex euros, who called the police, who filed the restraining order, who tried to protect herself and her children a circumflex euros, is still living with the question that survivors of crimes like this always carry, the one that no verdict and no sentence can ever fully answer. Why wasn't it enough? The answer, as it so often is in cases like this, is that the system moved almost fast enough. And almost, in the language of tragedy, is the most devastating word in any language. Joseph Castorna will die in prison, and 4 families will spend the rest of their lives learning how to live with what he did on the night before Halloween, 2022, in Aurora, Colorado.